I was compelled to move here by an article about the Gang of Five. And for me, that particular group of artists, because they were children during the Vietnam War, so certainly experienced the war, but their whole, when they got out of art school in '82 and started to work as artists, they were looking towards the future. They weren't looking back. It was, they wanted to go beyond the war and beyond the sorrow. And for me, my husband had died and I had come here, and I, of course, had the good fortune to meet Pham Quan Vinh, one of the Gang of Five, on my very first day here. And within 3 months, I guess, I started building this house. And I went, I bought a Jeep and I drove from Saigon to Hanoi with these artists. And just it was this amazing exploration of being with people that, being in a culture that was totally foreign from me. I didn't know anything about Vietnam, as all Americans, during that. And sadly, Vietnam was just this very tragic war that both countries suffered. But we, as a country, we didn't know anything about your culture. So as I'm learning through these artists, the music, the spirituality, the dance, the art, it just opened this whole new world for me that was fascinating. We finished this house, I think, in 1996. And I started working from here, and I knew all these other artists, because in my first year here, one of these artists or somebody would pick me up every day on their motorbike. And
You're lucky.
I was so lucky, totally blessed. Yeah. And they would take me to see other artists or see other Gang of Five members, or go to pagodas, go hear Quan Ho singing and Bak Ning, and just, all these facets of your culture. Yes. So that, of course, was this amazing time for me. And I think, when I was first here, I guess, as you said, I was working out of here. And then by 2000, it was 2001, I guess. I was very happy to work out of here. And of course, I didn't feel, as an American and as a middle-aged American, I felt, people say, "Oh, why didn't you open why didn't you open a gallery sooner?" And I said, number one, I didn't know anything. I had to learn, but also I was very sensitive to the fact that I'm an outsider here. And I'm also that Vietnam War generation, so I was very sensitive to that. That I felt that I really, and I think this is correct, and I think it's the right way, it's respectful to your culture. I had to earn my place, and I had to earn the trust and the faith of the people. And so, I'm astonished still at the way that your country's people and these artists opened their hearts and their homes and really accepted me, and they taught me everything. When I had my first opening, which was The Light of the Spirit, Le Quoc Viet, was a really wonderful exhibition that I think for me was, it was very meaningful because he and Tran Hoang Son, it was a dual exhibition entitled The Light of the Spirit. And that was what Vietnam became for me. I came to this country that had this dark, dark past, and I found the light. I found the way that your country and your people helped me to transform my sorrow. Because I came here and I saw a country that my sorrow seemed so small. People get sick and die, like my husband, that's normal, that's normal life. What your country experienced is not normal. And I thought, how can these people are so fortunate. So, all these feelings for me. So this work about, finding the light in the darkness and became kind of the guiding light for my life here. And I can remember, this is such a wonderful memory, Nguyen was a mentor for me. And he was also a mentor for the Gang of Five, you know, because he would hang out at Zun Tung's house. And there's always some controversy about, was it Zun Tung or Nguyen who named the Gang of Five?
That's so interesting.
It's a really funny, we could go on and on about that. But when I opened this exhibition in 2002, November of 2002, when Nguyen came and he gave me this beautiful portrait of himself, you know, as a gift, I was so touched. And I said, oh, Nguyen, I said, can you believe, because it's almost 8 years, right, since I came there. I said, can you believe it's taken me 8 years to open a gallery? And he looked at me and he said, but of course. He said, you didn't know anything.
It's so Nguyen.
But it's so Nguyen, but it's so, that to me is what Vietnam is.
Yeah.
It's like, of course, you didn't know anything. You know, it's like earning my place, and you have to do the work, you know, so. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
I mean, you said just now that you were so inspired by and so touched by the work of the Gang of Five, alongside with many other Vietnamese artists at the time, whose work kind of helped to provide a different imagination of the Vietnamese identity or the Vietnamese story at the time, which kind of goes beyond mere portrayal of war suffering. And indeed, they also talk about aspirations. But they are also critical reflections of the time and the people and the community. And you've also expressed and shared before that you are for the kind of art that acts as a kind of a bridge for conciliation, not just between Vietnam and the US, but also between conflicts in general. And undoubtedly, of course, Art Vietnam Gallery helped you to fulfill some of that mission. And I was wondering if you could share maybe some highlight exhibitions or activities or initiatives that Art Vietnam carried out that kind of helped to realize this mission of reconciliation.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I would say probably the first one that comes to mind that is maybe not, well, it is about reconciliation, was in 2006. We did an exhibition of Le Tour Tien's work, these monumental, that's when he first started doing, and I believe he was really one of the first artists to do lacquer as sculpture. So that's when he started on his reflection series. So, you know, they're 200 meters high and 100 centimeters wide and 15, 20 deep. And, you know, comprised of clay and earth and lacquer, and they all had these polished, mirrored surfaces. And as he, you know, was making the work and describing the work for me, and it's so kind of quintessential Tien, but in the sense that you're looking, the viewer, of course, becomes one with the work. And as you look in the work, you see yourself. And then, of course, you reflect. It provokes one to look deeper, to look what's beyond, like what's beyond the artwork, what's beyond, you know, to go inside yourself and to reflect on, yeah, the meaning of life and seeing the unseen. So for me, that's how, of course, Tien, his own personal history is a factor in that, but that is for me that's how we reconcile whatever kind of tragedy happens to us or any kind of upheaval in our lives. You know, we have to go inside before we can go outside. Another really standout for me that was awesome was in 2008 when I turned 60. And as you know, in Vietnam or in the Chinese zodiac or in the zodiac, you know, that's the end of a cycle, of a person's cycle. So I'm born in the year of the rat. And Le Quoc Viet, one of the artists that I discovered early on, he's also a rat. And Pham Quan Vinh is also a rat who built my house with me. So, you know, we're the rat pack.
Luckily, there's no mouse. No cat.
Well, I have some cat friends, but they keep us busy. So when I don't know how he really kind of started on this concept, but he came to me. I was really, really touched, and he wanted to do an exhibition to celebrate my 60th birthday. So he conceived this idea of doing 60 scrolls. That's one of them over there, hanging in the back. So the scrolls were entitled 60 scrolls to commemorate, 60 years of my life. And he entitled the series, "This is What I Heard," because all of Buddha's teachings were oral. The first line of every translation of Buddha's teachings are, "This is what I heard." So it's kind of a metaphor for life, like this is what Suzanne has perhaps been experiencing, or this is life, this is my interpretation. So he took, he's a gnome, he's a Buddhist scholar, he's a gnome, he grew up in a pagoda. His life is very influenced by Buddhism and by gnome. So he created these 60 scrolls that were just, so beautiful. I was so touched. And it was about spirituality, and it's also about reconciliation. It's about healing and transforming feelings. So I can see those are, I guess, for really memorable exhibitions, those are ones that have the most impact on me. I mean, it's like, when you ask me what's my favorite exhibition, it's kind of like asking a mother who's her favorite child.
You will always have one, though. You will always.
Yeah, you probably do.
But we don't say.
I'm not a mother, so I haven't had that privilege.
I feel like in the words that you just shared with us, the strong impacts that these artists and the life lived here have had on you. But I think vice versa, your arrival and your decision to stay here, and also like in the late 80s, early 90s, with the arrival of other people, other historians and art figures like Natasha Karavsky, Veronica Radulovic, Nora Taylor, and you. I think these arrivals also had a strong impact on the scene here. And I was wondering, because we're not, we weren't there at that time.
We were very
we were kids, too
We
young.
were toddlers.
So I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about that time, for the art scene here to have received this strong female presence,
Well, it's nice to think of it that way. I mean, there were some men who helped too, of course.
like you.
Yeah, well, he's much later, of course. That was I was just talking to somebody yesterday about that, because I always, in my mind, that was the magical time in Hanoi. The 90s were so special, because of course Vietnam was just coming out of the war and opening up to the outside world, and yet you still had this romantic, historical, melancholy. I mean, just the beauty, of course, of the place. But like going to Natasha was a huge, she was the place. Everybody, if you were interested in anything as a foreigner, everybody went to Salon Natasha. Because of course Busan Tan's there and she's there. It was kind of like, I used to always call it the refuse neck gallery. It just represented change and freedom and so much. And then, of course, Veronica, with all her work with the artists at the school, and Nora Taylor. Of course, Nora Taylor had the biggest impact, because it's because of her that I came here, because of that article that I read. And she was still here, I guess, when I came in '94, but then she left and of course came back. But those early days, I think that there was so much, as I really reflect on it, what was really wonderful about those times is there were so many foreign artists and writers and musicians, people, because it was like Vietnam, this country, this kind of magical country that nobody knew anything about. So a lot of people from all over the world were coming, and they would all be at Salon Natasha or later at my gallery with Zun Tong. And it was such a interesting time of, curiosity. People were exchanging ideas about culture. There was so much collaboration. All these things that maybe that kind of goes in waves. I think when artists first get exposed, they're so excited to work with everybody, but then they get kind of afraid that people are gonna take their ideas away, so they kind of contract, and then they expand. It's kind of a process, but I think that period of time until maybe 2000, early 2000s, that 10 years maybe around there, was just a glorious time of, I suppose it's like a seedling growing or a child becoming, a thinking human being. It was so exciting and dynamic and a lot of really wonderful cultural exchange, and performance and all these ways of working and expressing yourself that Vietnamese artists, had never done. They were breaking out. It was a real breakout period. That was wonderful. Yeah, really wonderful.
I mean, we're right now sitting in the latest iteration of Art Vietnam Gallery, is in the salon.
Yes.
But this is also your private space, your personal home. And as you know, already operating art spaces with it and organizing exhibitions within the privacy of your home isn't a new practice in Vietnam, as you had just explained in the example of Salon Natasha, or later on we have Nha San Studio. How do you deal with having work and life and living and artwork so close to one another? Does it present any obstruction or any limitation to what you do and how you live?
It's so interesting that you asked that, because I feel, some of this was, it was pre-COVID that I came back to work here. But I think experiencing COVID really made it so apparent to me that I find it the greatest gift I could have possibly ever been given. Because, number one, I love this house because I built it, with Vin, and we have there's so many wonderful memories. And then also I have all these artists' works all around. So especially like during COVID, it was like, I didn't feel I never felt lonely here, because it's like having all these artists here, but they're not saying anything, I have my solitude. So it's like having your best friends with you, but it's quiet. So I feel it's a blessing, Of course there are restrictions because of the physical size of the space. Like I can't show installation work, or I can't do big, canvases, but that's okay. When I want to do an exhibition like that, like we partner with Manzi and we've partnered with Workroom 4, or I find another space where I can, that's more appropriate for the particular show that I might want to curate. But I find by, working here, and we do piano concerts, we do book talks, we do reading, we do different private kind of events here, which is really nice. And I feel for the people who come here, whether if they're collectors, they're kind of used to seeing art in all situations. But maybe more for the person who's just coming to look at art, if they can come here, because it's an intimate space and it's where I live, so it makes the art more accessible. It's kind of like, oh yeah, they can see it in their house, what it would look like to live with. So I think it sometimes makes the art more accessible. And I get these wonderful conversations. I think because it is more intimate, and I'm generally, I have conversations with everybody that comes here. Or if they bring their children, we share meals, and I listen to the children talk about the art, which is heavenly. You know, it's very inspiring for me because I learn so much from the people that come. So I think it's this wonderful exchange of energy, really.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important for people in my generation, really, and for generations younger to have to listen, or to have the opportunity to listen to people like you who are there, to have seen it, to experience the scene as it was and as it was developing. All of these human witnesses are so important as, you know, history books or essays or research. You know, it's also equally important to listen to real voices too.
Well, you know, thank you, Bill. That's really kind of you, and I appreciate that. It's like me, though, really, when I came here, and I would go see Mai Van Hien, or Tran Duy, or Tai Va Bun, you know, and have these conversations with these people who had, artists, you know, who had been through so much and learned so much. You know, you know, every generation, that's our duty, right, is to kind of pass it on and to share. Like I remember when Nguyen, working with Nguyen on the Gang of Five exhibition at the film studio.
Yeah.
You know, it's really because of her. So here's this young girl, she's, you know, I approached, maybe in about 2015, Van Nguyen from the Gang of Five. You know, I said, Van, you know, hey, you know, I really want to do an exhibition of the Gang of Five.
Yeah.
I've never done an exhibition of those five as a collective. So finally, in about 2015, I said to Van, I said, you know, I really want to do an exhibition of the Gang of Five as a way of, you know, I said, I'm getting older, you know, I'm not going to live forever, and I would like to honor you for, I've had this, just this marvelous, glorious life here in Vietnam, working with all kinds of artists and meeting people, and it's all because of you, you all, you know, and I would love to do that. And I said also, you know, people in Hanoi and also in Saigon, they don't know your work, because all of their work, because they stopped exhibiting together in Hanoi in '96, it all went outside the country. So nobody knows their work. So we talked about it, you know, it took, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then finally it's like, okay. So then we started having meetings. And Nguyen was working with Tran Long at the time as a young curator and just helping him with his activities. So we started talking about it, and then we decided that the Ly Kwak Su gallery space was not big enough to accommodate 5 artists. So then we started looking for spaces. And it's because of Nguyen, and Tran Long knew about the Vietnam Film Studio, and you know, he's quite good, of course, about foraging spaces and connection, you know, so many connections. So it's because of, it took those two a year to get permission, you know, because it, you know, it was just a band. I mean, there were people there drinking tea, but nothing happened in that. And it was full of, when we first went to see it, I'll never forget it, you know, it's this cavernous space and all these movie posters everywhere, and the sets, you know, the cannon and the streetcars and the, like,
the
hundreds
train cart.
The train, all these rickety bicycles and cannons, the jail. I mean, it was fabulous.
Fitting.
Yeah, it was perfect. So we thought, oh my God, this is perfect. And then, of course, we had to, I mean, it took months, I mean, to clean it out. And then, you know, decisions about, okay, let's use some of this stuff as sets. So, I mean, it was just amazing. It would never happen without Tran Long and Nguyen. And Nguyen then came to me because she was part of a Japan Foundation program for young curators. And they had given her a grant to do an exhibition. So, you know, I'm like hanging from, you know, out of money, don't know how I'm going to get the money to do this exhibition, but I just had to do it, and all of that kind of thing. And she said, you know, what do you think about if I curated the show with you? And I said, oh my goodness, that would be perfect. I mean, I was just thrilled and grateful, and so she really she was the main curator. You know, maybe it was my idea, but she just took it over, and she organized everything. She was brilliant, and also producing the Gang of Five book.
Yeah,
You know,
she's so talented.
She is so talented and works so hard, and she has so many characteristics that I don't have that make her a perfect curator. You know, she's very clear about what needs to be done and about the work, and leave all that emotional stuff aside. I'm much too emotional.
Hey,
you know?
but I think
She's
that's why you
wonderful.
guys made a perfect pair for that exhibition, because I think your open-heartedness and your willingness to experiment and to say yes to this space that if I had seen, I'd be like, no, we're not going in there.
Oh
I'm
my God.
looking for another spot.
It was amazing. I went there
Yeah.
on the opening.
Yeah.
So crowded.
Was it over 600 people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We created these traffic jams.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so exciting.
Yeah. And it's too crowded that even the artists, they didn't recognize anybody. They
Oh,
say
it
hi,
was-
they just hello, because
We were all
too
like-
overwhelmed.
It
right?
was so overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it was so perfect too,
Yeah.
because we saw so many. I mean, I saw all these old tea sellers and ladies I've known from on the street, and old artists, you know, that were in their 80s and 90s, you know, that I had met when I first came here in '94. Everybody came.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was so impressed.
It was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that exhibition stopped being just a visual art exhibition, and I think it really became a kind of a cultural event, a cultural milestone.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah, it's more than exhibition.
Yeah, definitely, because you somehow kind of saw or get to experience a different layer, a different facet, a different life that Hanoi had. And of course there was this perfect setting, this stage on which we get to see the super expressive and highly individualistic works of the Gang of Five. And you get to remember what it was like back then, and why it was so important to know this history that we all share in order to kind of understand where we are now. And I think that's what that exhibition did, at least for me.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. That's really wonderful to hear that, because I think that was the importance of that show. You know, when you think about it, of course, that's where all the propaganda movies were made.
Yeah.
And here's this group of artists that are the first generation of artists to break free from the
Yeah.
propaganda.
Yeah.
They didn't do any propaganda
Yeah.
work. So it's like history.
History, yeah.
History evolving, and
Yeah.
that's what history became. So it's a way of honoring that time also. You know, there were a lot of wonderful movies made, and
Yeah.
a lot of wonderful things about that time. So I see it as, there again, I think it's like this incredible gift. It's like, how do we recognize those magic gifts, you know, that come along in our life? I mean, like you say, you walk into that dusty, I mean, I have to say, when we first walked in, I thought, oh, wow. I mean, it's amazing, but what are we going to do? But it's also like mining for gold, I suppose. It's like, you know that it could be fabulous.
Yes.
And it was, you know. So I think it's that recognizing, you know, when the energy's right, when it feels right, even though it's a little scary and doesn't, you have to kind of go through there. You have to go through, you have to cross the barriers.
Yeah.
And look what can happen. And that's, to me, what that exhibition really represented, you know. And they were the ones who broke the barriers, the Gang of Five.
And I think once again with Chancing Modern, with that exhibition, you guys collectively broke another barrier too. And I think that barrier is to do with the possibility of how to recontextualize these group of artists. And I believe Gang of Five was only one group amongst many artists at the time, of that time, the 80s and 90s, the early 2000s, what it means to recontextualize them and use their work as a kind of an example to also understand what it means to be making contemporary arts today. that we as young artists and as younger practitioners, we also need to borrow some of that resilience almost that they had back in the day in order to move on, you know. So you guys definitely broke that barrier. How to make the historical relevant, I think that's what that exhibition did too.
Well, you know, that touches a really important point, I think, is how to make history relevant. And that's like, for me, it's like, how do I make my life relevant?
Yeah.
I mean, how do I make what I do relevant?
Yeah.
And it's another wonderful milestone for me, because I think that, you know, I'm 75 years old now. I'm not going to live forever. And I think, okay, what can I do now to still add value, but how can I bring forth, I guess, what I've been able to do and pass it on and make it more meaningful? Because, you know, times are changing, ways are changing, and the way we relate to art and everything is changing. So, you know, I'm so happy to be kind of at the plate, like where Natasha and myself and Madame Nguyen from Lotus Gallery in Saigon. You know, it's, okay, we're like history. I mean, we were the history, and now it's all these young people, people like you and like you, that are making the new way. You know, so we're just the bait. We're kind of like the building blocks.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy to be that.
We follow your steps.
Well, but you make them better. I mean, which every generation does. You know, you learn from us, and of course we learn from you too. And then you do it your way, and the way that's appropriate for the time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And it's really exciting to see. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
watching
I
I've never had children, but it's like watching your children grow up.
It's
Blossom.
Yes.
You know, it's so like you and Nguyen and yourself and all these young curators and gallerists that are doing wonderful work. It's so exciting for me.
Thanks. You talk about the young generation, and you see now in Hanoi there are Manzi, the AC, what is the name? VCA.
VCA
Center.
VCCA.
VCCA and the Outpost. And in the south there's Nguyen Gallery. You
Sunart is
Sunart,
amazing.
Nguyen Art Foundation, and you also mentioned about the Phương Gallery. So what do you think of the collectors and the galleries or the art space, the organizations now, and what do you think, or you have any ideas or advice to us?
Whoa, that's a big question. I mean, I think what you're doing, the kind of work you're doing, as I said, is so admirable, and, you know, combining education with, I mean, you can have all kinds of collectors. I mean, I've always felt, and I think we talked about this a bit at your first exhibition, about how Vietnam will never really get a place on the international art stage until they have a serious base of collectors, internal collectors. And that's happening now, of course, we see. It's mostly with the Indochine period, so I'm hoping that, but there's a lot of young Vietnamese we're seeing that are starting to collect contemporary work, and of course your work is, you're kind of leading the way, you're the flame. But I feel that, we as art lovers and gallerists and dealers, art sellers, you might say, you know, we have a responsibility to help build the art market here, and to make sure that it's transparent and professional, and that it doesn't just become this frenzy of buying material goods that you can exchange and make money. That art doesn't become, I mean, this is always my biggest fear about the art world today, is that art becomes a commodity just like anything else, like a stock or some product. You know, because art is beyond all of that. It's beyond commercial value. Art has spiritual value, and it has something to teach us that's much beyond any kind of financial gain. So I think that art sellers and buyers, collectors, have a responsibility to try to educate people in Vietnam about the value of what is really the value of art, and also to be very professional in their dealings, you know, with, we've got to develop, you know, places where provenance can be certified, you know, so that then Vietnamese art can really have the exposure that it, and these artists can get the exposure that they deserve. So I think everybody has to be a part of that. And I see a lot of, now a lot of collectors are forming these collectors clubs, and you know, they're exchanging information, and they're traveling, they're going all over the world and going to these biennales and exhibitions, and they're learning from other collectors and other countries how to build an art market and a serious professional art institutions. And you all are, so everybody's, I think it's very promising. I feel very hopeful and optimistic, because I think there's a real interest in that.
Yes.
And I think it will override, you know, maybe sometimes the more not so nice side of the art world, where people are just focused on making money or flipping something, or I think that the stronger, you know, that interest to really build a strong professional market here and a collector base, it's really beginning now, and I think it's going to flourish. So it's a wonderful time to be here.
Yes.
I mean, it was famously said that if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And you have famously said to me before that if you can make it in Hanoi, you can make it anywhere. And so thank you so much for like sharing with us the tips on how to make artwork in Hanoi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.